Some nights, the sky itself feels like it's holding its breath. That was how it was in Fort Collins, Colorado that evening. A suburban hush as storm clouds pressed low over rooftops, turning the air thick and electric. Emily Carter stood at her kitchen window, her coffee cooling untouched, her laptop screen aglow with a half-written article she could no longer focus on. It had been a year since the accident, since her world cracked and everything familiar slid sideways. She'd learned to live in the silence, to find comfort in routine, to manage the ache by keeping busy. But on this night, something changed. At first, it was just a shadow moving near the edge of her backyard, where the weeds grew wild and the woods crept close. Then lightning flashed, and she saw him. A large, drenched horse, brown as burnt sugar, nostrils flaring, sides heaving. The animal paced the fence line, hooves churning the muddy ground, every muscle quivering with fear and exhaustion. Emily felt her pulse stutter. Horses were rare in her quiet neighborhood. A stray, a runaway. Her mind raced through explanations, but none fit. She hesitated, heart pounding as thunder rolled over the rooftops, rattling the glass. She grabbed an apple from the counter, her late father's trick, a memory that made her throat ache, and stepped barefoot onto the slick grass, rain stinging her skin. The horse shied at first, head tossing, eyes wild with panic. But Emily kept her voice low, her movements slow as she crept closer. "Hey there. Easy, boy. It's okay. You're safe here," she murmured, holding out the apple, her fingers trembling. The horse sniffed the air, ears twitching, then edged toward her, the whites of his eyes bright in the stormlight. He was massive up close, muscle and bone beneath a coat slick with rain, his sides streaked with mud. But there was something gentle, almost pleading, in the way he leaned in, nostrils fluttering. He took the apple in his teeth, crunching down with surprising delicacy. Emily let out a shaky breath. She reached up, intending to brush his mane, and stopped short. A length of faded, once red fabric was tangled in the horse's mane, dark with grime and blood. As she drew it free, the horse snorted, hooves stomping in agitation. The scarf felt rough in her hand, and as she turned it over, she saw faint, stitched initials, LH. Her mind reeled. She started to unwind the scarf, and something hard, small, and impossibly out of place dropped into her palm. It was a fragment of bone, no bigger than a knuckle, yellowed and stained. Emily's vision narrowed, her stomach dropping as realization struck. This wasn't just some lost horse. This was a message, a warning, or a plea. The wind picked up, rattling the branches overhead. And Rusty, the name popped into her mind unbidden, for the color of his coat, pressed against her as if seeking protection. He was trembling so hard his whole body vibrated. Emily ran her hand down his neck, murmuring, "It's all right. I'm here." But her own hands wouldn't stop shaking. Rain lashed down harder, soaking them both, and Emily backed toward the house, urging Rusty to follow. He hesitated, muscles bunching as if he might bolt, but stayed by her side as she led him beneath the shelter of the sagging back porch. She fumbled for her phone, her mind spinning. This was beyond her. A stray horse was one thing, but a bloodied scarf and a human bone were something else entirely. She scrolled through her contacts, found the number she'd saved months ago but never called. Dr. Ben Harmon, a retired equine vet who lived 2 blocks over. Her voice shook as she hit call. The phone rang once, twice, then a gruff, familiar voice answered. "Emily? Everything all right?" She tried to steady herself, failed. "Ben, I need your help. There's a horse. He's hurt, I think, and there's something else. Something bad." A pause, then, "Stay put, Emily. I'll be there in 5. As she hung up, lightning forked across the sky, illuminating Rusty's trembling frame. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, the scarf balled in one fist, bone tucked deep in her pocket. In that moment, every carefully built wall inside her felt like it might collapse. She'd spent months closing herself off from the world, but now the world had come crashing into her backyard, wild and bleeding and desperate for help. Rusty nuzzled her hand, soft and insistent, as if he could sense the storm inside her matching the one outside. Emily shivered as thunder boomed overhead. The storm swirling closer, she glanced at the scarf, its faded initials staring up at her like a dare. LH. A cold certainty settled in her chest. Whatever had brought Rusty to her yard tonight wasn't over. It was just beginning. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder as Ben's headlights cut through the rain-soaked darkness, bouncing across the wet grass. Emily pressed her palm to Rusty's neck, feeling the frantic thump of his heartbeat, matching her own. She didn't know what she was about to uncover, but she knew, deep in her bones, that nothing would ever be the same. Dawn broke over Fort Collins in a wash of gray, the air heavy with the aftertaste of last night's storm. The world felt raw, new, as if every leaf and blade of grass was holding its breath. Emily Carter barely slept. Each time her eyes fluttered closed, she saw Rusty's wild eyes, felt the cold weight of that bone in her pocket, and heard thunder echoing in her head. When the morning finally forced her up, the house felt different, tense, watchful. She found Rusty waiting in the backyard, pacing along the battered wooden fence, his massive form casting uneasy shadows across the dew-soaked lawn. Despite the comfort of a dry blanket and a trough of water, he refused to leave the edge of the yard, his gaze fixed on the overgrown field behind Emily's home. Emily watched him from the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold, the blood-stained scarf and bone laid out on the table beside her laptop. Her fingers itched to type, to make sense of the chaos, but words failed her. When she finally stepped outside, the grass was slick against her bare feet, the sky bruised and undecided. Rusty's ears flicked as she approached, but he was single-minded, pawing at the ground with growing agitation. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, as if he could answer. He snorted and nudged the fence, then turned and looked at her with such urgency it sent a chill racing down her spine. Rusty's hooves began to dig at a spot where the wild grass grew thickest, right along the fence line. Emily hesitated, heart pounding, but something in the horse's insistence propelled her forward. She crouched beside him, brushing wet weeds aside, her hands shaking as she started to dig with her fingers, following where Rusty's hooves tore at the earth. Within moments, her nails scraped against something hard. She froze, then carefully pulled away clumps of dirt to reveal the stark, unmistakable white of bone. For a moment, the world tilted. Emily pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to scream. There was no mistaking what she saw, a length of broken bone, jagged at one end, stained with ancient soil. The sight made the air feel colder, heavier, as if the ground itself was exhaling secrets long buried. Rusty lowered his head, snuffling at the bone with a mournful sound, his body tense as a drawn wire. Emily stumbled backward, phone clattering to the ground, as she fumbled to call 911. Her voice was a ghost, barely more than a whisper, as she explained what she'd found. Within minutes, red and blue lights danced through the morning mist, sirens shattering the silence as squad cars rolled up and officers swarmed the yard. Detective Laura Martinez arrived, steady, kind-eyed, and carrying the weight of years in her posture. Emily had seen her around town, always quick with a gentle word, but now her face was grave as she approached the scene. "Emily, can you tell me what happened?" Martinez asked, her voice low and steady. Emily gestured helplessly. "It was the horse. He wouldn't leave. He kept digging. Her words fell apart, her hands shaking as she wiped rain from her face. Martinez knelt beside the bone, her features tightening as she examined it. "You did the right thing calling us." She glanced up at Rusty, who stood close by, ears pinned, as if unwilling to let anyone near the site. "This horse, he's not just lost, is he?" Emily shook her head. "I don't think so. He came last night during the storm. There was this scarf and—" She pressed the fabric into Martinez's gloved hands, watching the detective's brow furrow as she took in the initials, the stains, the weight of the night's discovery. The next hours blurred into a chaos of police tape, camera flashes, and the low, murmured voices of officers working the scene. Martinez took Emily aside, gently but firmly steering her into the house as more officers cordoned off the field. "We need to treat this as a crime scene, Emily. I'm going to ask you to stay inside for a while." Emily nodded, numb, her mind spinning. Through the window she watched as Rusty stood sentinel by the fence, his massive frame tense, his eyes never leaving the patch of disturbed earth. It was as if he was guarding not just the bones, but the secrets they represented. Within hours, word spread. News vans rolled up the street, reporters jostling for a glimpse over the police barricade. Neighbors whispered on their porches, curiosity and fear mingling in the morning air. Emily's phone buzzed non-stop, calls from friends, distant relatives, even strangers, each one hungry for details. She ignored them all, clutching her mug, her gaze fixed on Rusty. The horse wouldn't leave her side, his loyalty unwavering, even as chaos swirled around them. Detective Martinez returned mid-afternoon, her expression grim. "Emily, we've confirmed the remains are human. This isn't going to be easy. The state forensics team is on their way. We'll need you to stay available for questions." Emily nodded, swallowing hard as old memories surged. Her missing sister, the night everything changed, the pain she'd buried deep for years. Her carefully managed life was unraveling, threads pulled loose by a horse with haunted eyes and secrets in his mane. That night, as the sun dipped low and reporters' voices faded, Emily sat beside Rusty, her hand tangled in his damp mane. The horse shivered, restless, staring into the dark as if waiting for something, or someone. Emily felt it too, a restless urgency in her chest. Rusty wasn't a stray. He'd come with purpose, carrying messages from the past, and he was searching for answers only she could help uncover. And as lightning flickered on the horizon, Emily knew in her bones that whatever had started in her backyard was far from over. The following day dawned bleak and colorless, sunlight barely filtering through swollen clouds. Emily Carter felt the weight of exhaustion in her bones, but she couldn't rest. Sleep was impossible with the memories churning inside her, and the uneasy sense that the story unfolding in her backyard had only begun. Fort Collins had never felt so small or so full of eyes. The morning news trucks still lingered at the end of the block, their satellite dishes like awkward antennae searching for secrets. Reporters loitered near the yellow police tape, trading rumors, while neighbors whispered and pointed from behind curtains. Emily ignored them all, instead focusing on the constant presence of Rusty, who now paced the edges of her yard with restless energy. He seemed agitated, as if every sound set him on edge, and his anxious eyes followed her everywhere. She tried to distract herself by jotting down notes, typing out half-formed sentences for a new article, but the cursor blinked accusingly. Her mind kept circling back to LH. the initials on the scarf, and the terrible possibility of whose bone she had found. Mid-morning, as a weak sun broke through the clouds, Emily heard a sudden crash outside, the rattle of metal against wood, a sharp, frightened whinny. She hurried out to find Rusty pawing and snorting near her old garden shed, which had half collapsed from years of neglect and last night's storm. His eyes were wide, nostrils flared, coat flecked with sweat despite the chill in the air. "Rusty, what is it?" she called, feeling foolish but compelled by his urgency. He kept digging at the dirt, then nudged a tangle of debris aside with his nose. Something metallic glinted in the sunlight. Emily stepped closer, her heart in her throat, and crouched beside him. There, barely visible beneath the mud and fallen shingles, was an old metal lunchbox, its paint chipped and rusted by time. She hesitated, fingers trembling as she pried it loose. The box felt strangely heavy for its size. Rusty, watching her closely, gave a low nicker as if urging her onward. She carried the lunchbox inside, setting it gently on her kitchen table. For a moment she just stared, afraid of what she might find, but knowing she couldn't turn away now. With a deep breath, she flipped the rusted latch. The lid creaked open, revealing a strange time capsule of a stranger's life. Inside, carefully folded and yellowed with age, were several faded love letters, ink faded but still legible. Emily gingerly lifted one, reading the opening lines. "My dearest, I hope this finds you safe." Her heart twisted at the words. Beneath the letters, she found a torn black and white photograph. A young woman with bright, wary eyes and a half smile, her hair swept back in a style decades old. Taped to the back was a single name, Lillian Harper. Emily's breath caught, the initials from the scarf. She reached further and found a silver charm, simple, heart-shaped, tarnished, but still beautiful. As she turned it over in her palm, a folded scrap of paper fluttered out. It was a letter penned in a trembling hand. "If anything happens, trust the horse. Rusty will know, please. Don't let the truth die here." The words struck her like a blow, the desperate hope and fear almost tangible in every letter. Emily pressed her hands to her mouth, feeling the old ache of loss bloom fresh in her chest. For a moment, she was 13 again, remembering how her own sister vanished without a trace, and how no one in town wanted to talk about it. The same silence, the same unwillingness to dig into old wounds. She looked up at Rusty, who stood by the back door, peering at her with those intelligent, mournful eyes. "You were Lillian's, weren't you?" she whispered, voice cracking. Rusty's ears flicked forward, as if he understood. The more she read, the more Emily's sense of kinship deepened, not just with Lillian, but with the horse who had somehow become the bridge between past and present. She spread the contents of the lunchbox out on the table, letters full of longing, apologies, and fear. The photograph, the charm, and the last, desperate note. It all painted a picture of a woman on the edge, afraid of the world closing in, trusting only her horse. The realization settled on Emily like a weight. Rusty was not just a stray, not just a lost animal who wandered into her life. He was the last living witness to something terrible, a silent guardian of secrets no one else wanted to face. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of phone calls, interviews, and questions from the police and Detective Martinez. Emily shared the contents of the lunchbox with Laura, who listened intently, her expression grave. "It looks like you found more than just evidence, Emily," Martinez said. "You found a piece of someone's soul." As night fell and the world grew quiet, Emily sat by Rusty's side in the backyard, the lunchbox tucked beneath her arm. The air was sharp with the scent of wet grass, her thoughts tangled with questions. She felt both haunted and comforted, not just by Lillian's plea, but by the horse's quiet strength. He stood beside her as if he'd done this 100 times before, watching the shadows lengthen, ears pricked, muscles tense. Emily stroked his neck, feeling his warmth ground her in the present, even as ghosts of the past crowded around her. In that moment, surrounded by mystery, memory, and the bond forming between woman and horse, Emily made herself a silent promise. She would follow the truth wherever it led, no matter how deep it was buried or how much it hurt. The wind whispered through the trees, and somewhere far off, thunder rumbled again, as if the sky itself remembered. Late the next morning, with the sun a faint disk behind thin clouds, Emily Carter found herself standing at the edge of the wild meadow behind her property, heart thumping. Rusty, ever vigilant, stood beside her, his big brown eyes tracking the horizon. The field, lush and tangled after spring rains, led to a distant structure half hidden by wild cherry trees, a sagging, weather-beaten stable that Emily had only glimpsed from afar. As a child, she'd heard rumors about the place. It was haunted. It belonged to a recluse. It was cursed. Now, holding Lillian's letter and remembering the desperate words, "If anything happens, trust the horse," Emily knew she had to see it for herself. Rusty nudged her side, almost impatient, then strode ahead, parting the high grass with each step. Emily followed, her sneakers quickly soaked, the lunchbox slung over her shoulder. She scanned the sky. More storms threatened, but for now the wind was just a whisper. The world hushed as if watching. They crossed the meadow together, Emily's thoughts swirling with anxiety and curiosity. With every step, she felt herself slipping further from the safe boundaries of her old life, and deeper into someone else's story. The stable loomed closer, paint peeling, roofline sagging. Vines choked the porch, and the old front doors hung crookedly, half off their hinges. Rusty stopped, snorted, and pawed at the packed earth, his nostrils flaring as he scented the air. For a moment, Emily hesitated, fear prickling at her skin. What was she expecting to find? But then she caught the gleam of the silver charm in her pocket, the shape of Lillian's name pressed into her palm, and she stepped forward. Inside, the stable was dim, thick with the scent of old straw, dust, and something fainter, like faded perfume or forgotten secrets. Sunlight filtered in through gaps in the roof, striping the floor with pale light. Cobwebs hung from every rafter, trembling as Rusty nosed aside a bale of rotting hay. The horse moved with purpose, his hooves silent on the wooden planks. Emily followed, holding her breath. Near the back wall, Rusty began to dig again, shoving aside hay and dirt with his nose. Emily dropped to her knees and sifted through the debris, her hands sticky with dust and the soft decay of old paper. She uncovered a child's sketch, its lines wobbly but recognizable, a drawing of a horse and a girl standing side by side beneath a crooked sun. Next to it was a broken charm, almost identical to the one she'd found in the lunchbox, and fragments of a diary, its pages torn and water-damaged. By the light of her phone, Emily pieced together what she could. The diary entries, written in Lillian's looping script, spoke of long days spent alone in the stable, watching storm clouds gather over the fields. She wrote about fear, of strangers, of men in suits who watched from the road, of neighbors who whispered and crossed the street. There were lines about hope, too, about Rusty, her faithful companion, and the belief that someday someone would find her story and understand. The words felt raw and immediate, echoing the grief Emily carried in her own heart. She thought of her sister, of unanswered questions, of silence and shame that had grown like weeds over the years. She thought of her own isolation, how she'd hidden away after the accident, avoiding people, avoiding pain. Now, reading Lillian's words, she felt both exposed and comforted. We are not so different, she realized. We were both abandoned in our own ways. Rusty shifted, lowering his head to nuzzle Emily's shoulder, the warmth of his breath steadying her. She wiped her eyes and kept reading. Deeper in the straw, she found another clue. A glove, stained dark red, its fabric stiff with dried blood. She stared at it, bile rising in her throat. There was no mistaking what this meant. Lillian had been right to be afraid. The betrayal she wrote about in her diary was no childish fantasy. It was real, and it had left evidence behind. Emily sat back on her heels, heart racing, the weight of what she'd found pressing down on her chest. She pictured Lillian hiding in this stable, clutching her diary, whispering secrets to Rusty in the darkness. She could almost hear the creak of the wind in the rafters, the distant echo of a girl's laughter turned to tears. In that moment, Emily felt a strange surge of anger, not just for Lillian, but for herself, for all the girls who had been ignored, who had vanished or been silenced while the world looked away. She closed her eyes and took a shaky breath, letting the stable's silence settle around her. Rusty pressed close, his soft nose bumping her cheek, his steady presence a lifeline. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel alone. She ran her fingers through his mane, drawing strength from his calm. As rain began to patter on the roof, Emily gathered the diary fragments, the broken charm, and the blood-stained glove. She wrapped them in Lillian's scarf and tucked them in her bag, careful not to leave a trace. Before she left, she took one last look around the stable, imagining Lillian's final moments here, hope flickering, terror mounting, the sense that the world was closing in. Back in the meadow, the wind had picked up, carrying the promise of another storm. Emily walked home with Rusty at her side, her steps steadier now, her resolve hardening. The past wasn't just a collection of bones and letters. It was alive, urgent, and demanding answers. She would not turn away. Whatever darkness haunted the old stable, Emily knew she was part of the story now. And she would see it through, no matter where it led. Night fell like a hammer, bringing with it a thick, restless silence that pressed against the windows of Emily's house. Thunderheads rolled in over Fort Collins once more, lightning flickering in the distance, wind rattling the porch swing. For a moment, Emily let herself believe the worst of it was over, that she'd gathered the pieces of Lillian's past, that her own grief could quiet again. But Rusty refused to settle. The horse stood near the back door, muscles tight, nostrils flaring every time the wind changed. He pawed the ground and snorted, his whole body vibrating with a tension Emily could feel in her own chest. She tried to distract herself by transcribing Lillian's diary fragments, tracing every trembling word by the light of her laptop. The more she read, the more the lines between past and present blurred. Lillian's suspicion, her loneliness, her sense that danger circled ever closer. Emily felt it now, crawling over her skin. She was so absorbed that she almost didn't hear the quiet thump at the front door. A thin envelope slipped under the frame. Emily's breath caught as she picked it up, heart pounding. The paper felt slick in her damp palm, and there was no return address, just her name, scrawled in shaky block letters. She hesitated, dread pooling in her stomach, then tore it open. Inside was a single sheet, the words clipped and sharp. "Let sleeping secrets lie or you'll end up like Lillian." Her fingers went numb. For a long moment she simply stared, the blood draining from her face, her mind skittering back to the blood-stained glove in the stable, the bone in Rusty's mane. This wasn't an old story. Someone out there was watching. Someone knew she was getting too close. Lightning crashed, closer this time. Rusty, agitated by her panic, reared up, hooves slamming the ground with enough force to make the windows tremble. Emily rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around his neck, her fear mirrored in his wild eyes. "It's okay. It's okay, boy, I've got you," she whispered, though the words sounded thin even to her own ears. He pressed his massive head against her shoulder, blowing hot, nervous breath down her neck. The old grief inside Emily was suddenly joined by something new, a pulsing animal need to survive, to protect, to not let Lillian's fate become her own. She called Detective Martinez immediately, her voice shaking as she read the note aloud. Laura's tone was grave, measured. "Emily, listen to me. This is serious. Whoever sent that wants you to be scared. They want you to back off, but you're not alone. I'll have patrols watch your house tonight just in case." Emily nodded, relief and dread warring inside her. What if Rusty's not safe here? There was a pause on the other end. "If you think you're in real danger, I can arrange for him to be boarded at the animal shelter. But I've got to warn you, some of the people connected to this case, they're powerful. They've been in this town a long time. Just be careful, Emily." She hung up, hand trembling. Outside, Rusty paced in tight circles, refusing to settle. Emily's mind raced, images of police tape and old bones flickering behind her eyelids, the sense that the past was closing in around her. She thought about sending Rusty away, about hiding him somewhere safe, but every time she looked at him, standing so bravely in the shadows, she knew she couldn't let him go. He had carried Lillian's secret for decades. He had come to her for a reason. As the hours crawled by, the storm intensified. Emily double-checked every window and lock, her nerves stretched thin. Each time thunder boomed, Rusty would rear or stamp, sometimes staring into the darkness as if he saw things Emily could not. Once, she caught him pawing the ground and snorting at something near the fence. But when she aimed her flashlight, nothing was there but wind and shadows. It was impossible to shake the feeling that they were being watched. A little after midnight, as Emily sat on the living room couch with her knees pulled to her chest, her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. The screen lit with just a single, chilling message. "Midnight, Miller's barn. Come alone if you want the truth." Emily's stomach turned to ice. Her first instinct was to call the police, but some deeper instinct, the same one that had told her to trust Rusty, to dig up bones, to read Lillian's words, told her this was a test. Whoever sent the note was counting on her fear. If she wanted to finish this, she'd have to face them on their terms. She glanced at Rusty through the window, his silhouette huge against the night. The horse lifted his head, as if sensing her decision, ears swiveling to meet her gaze. Emily slipped on her boots, grabbed Lillian's scarf and the lunchbox of evidence, and stepped into the storm. The air was sharp with electricity, the world charged and alive. Rusty trotted to her side, his presence a comfort and a promise. She whispered, "Stay close, boy. Whatever happens, we do this together." Lightning forked overhead as Emily and Rusty made their way through the wet, tangled grass toward Miller's barn, a place she hadn't visited since childhood, but which now called to her like a beacon in the dark. She moved quietly, senses straining for any hint of danger, her every nerve alive. The truth was waiting for her in the shadows, and Emily Carter would not run from it. Not tonight. Miller's barn stood at the end of a long dirt lane, its silhouette stark against the trembling curtain of lightning. Emily guided Rusty through the tall, rain-soaked grass, heart pounding so loudly it seemed to drown out the thunder overhead. The barn, once bright red, now slumped beneath years of neglect, a monument to old secrets and faded power. Every instinct told her to turn back, to call for help. But the weight of Lillian's letters, the scarf tucked in her jacket pocket, and Rusty's steady, unwavering presence pushed her on. They reached the barn as the clock ticked past midnight. The doors hung half open, the interior lost in shadow. Rain battered the roof, and thunder boomed so close that the whole structure seemed to tremble. Emily paused outside, pressing her palm to Rusty's warm neck. He tossed his head, ears swiveling forward, muscles taut and ready. Emily took a shaky breath and stepped into the darkness, leading Rusty behind her. The inside of Miller's barn was a cathedral of old wood and dust. The scent of mold and hay hit Emily as her boots squished in mud and straw. A few ancient bales formed silent sentinels along the walls, and the faint moonlight filtered through broken planks overhead, striping the dirt floor in uneven bars. For a moment, it seemed empty, only the echoes of water dripping and wind groaning through loose boards. But then, in the far corner, a shape moved, a man hunched beneath a sagging beam, clutching a battered flashlight that sent jittery cones of light across the walls. Emily's heart leapt to her throat. Rusty snorted, his massive body blocking her instinctively as if to shield her from danger. The man flinched at the sound, then straightened, the lines of his face catching the light. He was old, maybe 70, with a battered cowboy hat pulled low and a gray beard like tangled wire. His eyes, sharp and wary, darted between Emily and Rusty. "You Emily Carter?" he rasped, his voice rough as gravel. "You came alone?" Emily nodded, her hand never leaving Rusty's mane. "Who are you?" The man's mouth twisted in a grimace. "Name's Sam Blake. I worked these stables for 40 years. I knew Lillian. I knew what happened. Least some of it." His eyes flicked to the scarf peeking from Emily's pocket. "Didn't think anyone would ever dig up the truth. You got guts coming here." Emily's skin prickled. Fear and adrenaline tangled together. "Why did you call me here? What do you want?" Sam hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at the empty dark. "You got her horse, Rusty. That means you found what she left behind." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded, brittle paper. A map, its edges worn and dark with fingerprints. "Lillian trusted me. She found something she shouldn't have. Land deals, money laundering, bribes, right here in Fort Collins. Mayor, councilman, folks you'd never suspect. When she found proof, they came after her. She tried to hide, but they found her first." Emily's hands shook as she took the map. The paper was soft with age, hand-drawn lines marking the old stables, the meadow, and, circled in ink, a small cabin labeled Lillian's Cottage. Beside it, hidden room, key to the truth. "Why now?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Sam looked away, pain flickering across his face. "I kept my mouth shut too long. Wasn't brave, not like her. But I can't let him win. Not after all these years. You need to find that room, Emily. But you need to be careful. They're still watching. Still dangerous." Suddenly, a pair of headlights swept across the barn windows, illuminating the dust and cobwebs. Sam's eyes widened in terror. "They found us! Go! Take the map and run!" He pressed the map into Emily's hands and darted for a side door, vanishing into the night. Emily's heart hammered. Rusty pawed the ground, sensing her fear. The headlights flicked off, plunging the barn into darkness again. For a long second, nothing happened. Just the sound of Emily's ragged breathing and Rusty's nervous snorts. Then, a car door slammed. A heavy footfall outside. Voices, low and urgent, drifted through the broken boards. Emily stuffed the map into her jacket, gripped Rusty's mane, and pressed herself against the barn's back wall, heart in her throat. She could hear someone moving at the front entrance, flashlight beams dancing across the walls. Rusty trembled beneath her hand, but stood his ground, his body tense and ready to protect. The voices grew louder. 2, maybe 3 people searching, calling out in mocking tones. "Where you at, Sammy? We know you're in here." Emily stifled her panic, straining to see an escape route. Her eyes darted to a broken panel in the rear of the barn, half concealed behind a pile of old lumber. She tugged Rusty toward it, keeping low, breath shallow. She slipped through the gap first, rain lashing her face, then beckoned Rusty, who squeezed through with barely an inch to spare. They tumbled out into a patch of wild thistle, hidden from the headlights, the night air vibrating with tension. Behind them, the voices grew angry, cursing, searching, but Emily and Rusty stayed low, slipping into the tall grass, guided only by the flicker of lightning and the frantic pounding of Emily's heart. When they were finally clear of the barn, Emily crouched beside Rusty in the shadows, hands shaking. She opened her jacket and pulled out the map, staring at the faded ink. Lillian's cottage, hidden room, key to the truth. She pressed her forehead to Rusty's neck, tears stinging her eyes. "We're so close, boy. I just hope we make it." The storm raged overhead, but for the first time since this nightmare began, Emily felt a sliver of hope. Fragile but real. With Rusty at her side, she would follow this trail, no matter where it led. The truth was finally within reach, and Emily Carter would not turn back. By dawn, the storm had blown itself east, leaving the world scrubbed raw and trembling. The sky above Fort Collins was washed with pale, uncertain light, painting the fields in shades of silver and gray. Emily hadn't slept. Her mind churned with images of Sam Blake's haunted face, the map clutched in her shaking hands, the lurking danger that had stalked her through the night. Rusty seemed restless too, standing guard by the window, ears pricked for any sound out of place. She spread the hand-drawn map across her kitchen table, tracing the route to Lillian's old cottage, a place she'd only heard about in rumors. The cottage lay at the far edge of the wild meadow, half swallowed by a tangled thicket, surrounded by rusted barbed wire and brambles thick as a fist. Emily's hands trembled as she packed the lunchbox of evidence, Lillian's scarf and a flashlight, and slipped on her boots. This was it. The answers she'd been searching for her whole life were close enough to touch. She opened the door, and Rusty was already waiting. He seemed to sense the urgency, standing tall and still as a statue until she mounted him, her legs trembling. The world was eerily quiet as they set out, the hush after the storm magnifying every hoofbeat, every breath, every crack of dry branch beneath their weight. Emily guided Rusty through the high grass, following the landmarks on the map. An ancient cottonwood split by lightning, a fallen windmill, the remnants of a stone fence long since overtaken by weeds. With each step, her nerves coiled tighter. As they reached the edge of the woods, Emily caught her first glimpse of the cottage, a squat, battered structure nearly invisible beneath a choking blanket of vines and moss. The windows were black holes. The porch sagged as if it were exhaling its last breath. Emily slid from Rusty's back, her boots sinking into mud. She tied Rusty to a sturdy branch just beyond the tangle of barbed wire, whispering, "Stay close, boy. And if you hear anything, run." Rusty nickered softly, brushing his nose against her hand, his trust grounding her for one breathless moment. She approached the cottage, pushing open the door with her shoulder. It groaned in protest, swinging inward to reveal a single, cramped room cluttered with broken furniture, old trunks, and the smell of mildew and rot. The air was thick with history, pain and hope and fear layered together, heavy as the dust motes swirling in the faint light. Emily scanned the space, searching for clues. The map's crude lines pointed to a spot beneath the hearth. Emily dropped to her knees, fingers digging into the packed dirt and brittle straw. Her heart hammered. She pried up a warped floorboard, her breath catching as she uncovered a rusted iron ring. With a grunt, she tugged it free, revealing a narrow trap door camouflaged by decades of grime. Adrenaline shot through her veins. She fumbled for her flashlight and clicked it on, illuminating a shallow cavity beneath the cottage. Her pulse quickened as she reached in, pulling out a battered satchel heavy with papers. She barely had time to open it before a sudden acrid scent caught her attention. Smoke, thin and sharp, drifting through the cracks above. Emily's head snapped up. From somewhere outside, a flicker of orange bloomed against the window, a tongue of flame licking at the porch. The hair on her arms stood on end. Someone had set the cottage on fire. Panic jolted through her. She shoved the satchel into her backpack and scrambled to her feet. The flames raced hungrily up the outer walls, smoke billowing in thick, choking waves. She staggered toward the back door, only to find it jammed, the wood swollen and warped. Every breath burned her throat, her vision blurring as the room filled with heat and soot. The flames roared behind her, devouring the dry floorboards, racing toward the walls. She screamed for Rusty, praying he'd bolt to safety, but then heard the frantic pounding of his hooves outside. He hadn't left. In desperation, Emily slammed her shoulder against the back door. It groaned, held, then burst open, slamming her onto the muddy ground outside. The morning air was thick with smoke. She crawled to her feet, eyes streaming, and stumbled toward the fence, waving wildly for Rusty. The horse charged through the haze, his coat streaked with sweat and soot. He pressed against her side, nearly knocking her over, and nudged her with his nose, urging her to move. Emily clung to his mane, her legs barely working. Together they staggered through the thicket as the cottage collapsed in a storm of fire and cinders behind them. Emily was coughing and half blind, her skin stinging from the heat, but Rusty kept her upright. He moved with frantic determination, his instincts sharper than her own, leading her toward open air. They burst from the undergrowth into the sunlight, Emily collapsing to her knees in the grass. She gasped for breath, the acrid taste of smoke lingering in her lungs. She looked back at the inferno, the cottage engulfed in flames, black smoke pouring skyward. Whoever wanted Lillian's secrets buried had come close to succeeding, but Emily had the satchel clutched to her chest, the papers inside crinkling with each breath. Rusty, battered but unharmed, stood over her, blowing and trembling but alive. For a long, aching minute, Emily wept. Raw, unfiltered relief and terror coursing through her. She pressed her forehead to Rusty's flank, feeling the horse's steady heartbeat, drawing strength from the bond that had saved them both. When she finally opened the satchel, she found what she'd risked everything for: a ledger, pages dense with names, dates, and figures, proof of corruption, land deals, and money passing through hands that had shaped the town's destiny for decades. At the very bottom, a letter in Lillian's trembling script. If you're reading this, you know the truth. Please, don't let them silence you too. Emily looked up at Rusty, determination burning away her exhaustion. She would not let Lillian's voice die in the flames. She would bring the truth into the light, no matter what it cost. Dawn bled slowly across the sky, but the world felt anything but peaceful. Emily Carter, still trembling from the night's ordeal, knew she couldn't go home. Not yet. The documents she'd rescued, Lillian's ledger, the letters, and a lifetime of secrets, were zipped into her backpack, pressed tight against her heart. Rusty paced beside her, flanks twitching, nostrils flaring at every distant sound. It was as if the world itself had become dangerous, every shadow a threat, every gust of wind carrying warning. She didn't need to wonder long why she felt hunted. As the sun crested the tree line, the low rumble of a truck engine carried across the wet grass. Emily's heart seized. Someone was coming, and it wasn't the police. Rusty tensed, head high, ready to bolt, but Emily reached for his mane, steadying herself against him. "We stick together, boy," she whispered, barely breathing. The truck barreled down the dirt path, skidding to a stop at the edge of the meadow. A single figure leapt out, a man in a ball cap, broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone who knew the land and its secrets. Emily recognized him immediately, though her mind rebelled against it. Mayor Clayton Rourke, the very face of Fort Collins's old guard, the man whose smile had graced every local newspaper for years. He stalked toward her, eyes blazing. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," he barked, voice raw with rage and fear. Emily froze. Rusty danced nervously, ears flat, sensing the danger in the man's posture. "I don't want any trouble," Emily said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "But I'm not letting this go. Lillian Harper deserves justice. So does this whole town." Rourke laughed, a bitter, wild sound. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're nobody. Just a woman hiding behind a horse and some old fairy tales. Hand over the bag, or you'll end up like her." The words hit Emily like a slap. For one terrifying second, she thought he might lunge at her right there in the open, but Rusty shifted, stepping between them, his massive body blocking Rourke's advance. The horse pawed the ground, snorting, muscles bunched and ready. Emily felt Rusty's courage surge through her. She stood a little taller. "No," she said, her voice breaking like glass. "I won't." Rourke's face twisted. He lunged, reaching for her bag, but Rusty exploded into motion, ears pinned, eyes wild, charging forward with a force Emily had never seen. The mayor stumbled, thrown off balance, cursing as Rusty forced him back. Emily fumbled for her phone, hands slick with sweat, and managed to hit the emergency number. The phone rang, impossibly loud in the tense early light. Rourke circled, still trying to get past Rusty, but the horse lashed out with a warning kick that sent the man sprawling into the mud. Emily pressed her advantage, shouting into her phone, "This is Emily Carter! I'm at the East Meadow! Send police now! The mayor! He tried to attack me!" She barely registered the dispatcher's questions, her gaze never leaving Rourke. The mayor scrambled to his feet, his composure gone, his mask shattered. "You have no idea what you're doing," he spat, face contorted with hatred. "You think anyone will care? They're all in on it. Council, police, half the damn town." Rusty reared, hooves slicing the air, driving the mare back another step. Emily's voice shook, but she pressed on. "I have proof. Lillian's ledger. The whole story, bribes, payoffs, land theft. I'm not alone anymore. It's over." For a moment, something in Rourke's eyes flickered. Fear, or maybe recognition, that his world was crumbling. He turned as if to run, but the sound of sirens shattered the dawn. Blue and red lights flashed across the meadow, police cars skidding to a halt, officers spilling out with hands on their weapons. Detective Laura Martinez led the charge, her voice sharp with authority. "Mayor Rourke, get on the ground, now!" Cornered, desperate, Rourke tried to bolt, but Rusty blocked his escape, herding him like a stubborn calf until the police closed in. He fought, But it was over. Within minutes, he was cuffed, dragged away, his protests echoing uselessly against the morning breeze. Emily slumped to her knees, the adrenaline leaving her as quickly as it had come. The police swarmed around her, but Detective Martinez knelt at her side, concern etched deep into her face. "Are you all right?" Emily nodded, pressing the satchel into Laura's hands. "It's all here. Everything Lillian died for. Everything they tried to burn." She looked up at Rusty, who stood panting but proud, ears flicking at the sounds of chaos around him. "He saved me, Laura. He saved all of us." The officers led Rourke away, but the true storm was only beginning. News would ripple out from this meadow about the mayor, the ledger, the decades of secrets. Emily watched the faces of the police, the gathered neighbors, the news crews as they arrived in a hurry, each person stunned and changed by the truth as it finally came into the light. Standing in the trampled grass, Rusty nuzzled Emily's shoulder, anchoring her to the present. She stroked his mane, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, not from fear now, but from something like relief. For the first time, she felt the chains of the past loosen, the silence that haunted Fort Collins finally breaking. The reckoning was just beginning. But Emily wasn't afraid anymore. With Rusty by her side, she knew she had the strength to see it through. In the days following Mayor Rourke's arrest, Fort Collins felt as if a heavy shroud had been lifted. Yet what lay beneath was raw and tender. Exposed to the first honest sunlight in decades, the news rippled through the town like a shockwave. Emily Carter watched from her kitchen window as reporters set up camp on Main Street, and neighbors gathered in small, uncertain clusters to trade whispers that sounded more like confessions than gossip. No one had imagined that the roots of their quiet community twisted so deep into shadow. Emily herself felt adrift. The whirlwind of the past week, bones and ledgers, fire and flight, Rusty's fierce loyalty, had left her exhausted in body and spirit. She spent long hours in the barn with Rusty, brushing his mane, letting the soft rhythm of his breath calm her own. Some nights, she sat in the hay with her knees pulled to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks, her mind replaying everything she'd seen and done. In those moments, she finally allowed herself to break down, her hands trembling as she clung to Rusty's warmth, grief and relief tangled together. "It's over," she told herself, but she knew the truth. The past was never truly over. It left fingerprints on the present, marks you could feel in your bones, scars you sometimes tried to hide. Emily looked at Rusty, the last living witness to Lillian's pain, and realized that her own journey mirrored Lillian's more closely than she'd ever admitted. Both had known isolation. Both had tried to protect themselves with silence. Both had learned the hard way that the world could be cruel, and that the price of secrecy was paid in sorrow. The investigation that followed was swift and relentless. Detective Martinez worked around the clock, her compassion tempered by steely determination. Emily met with her almost daily, delivering everything she'd uncovered: Lillian's letters, the blood-stained glove, the ledger. The documents were damning, implicating not only Rourke but several others whose names had once been spoken with respect. Business owners, council members, even a former police chief. Some people denied everything, but others, confronted with evidence, broke down in tears, admitting to actions they'd kept hidden for years. One morning, as Emily sorted through Lillian's battered lunchbox, she found a final letter she'd somehow missed before. It was folded small, tucked into the seam of the lunchbox's lining. The paper was brittle, the handwriting shaky but determined. To whoever finds this, don't let my story be forgotten. Speak up, even if you're scared, even if you think no one will listen. Silence only makes the darkness grow. There is always someone who will hear you. There is always hope. Emily's tears spilled freely as she read Lillian's last plea. Not just for justice, but for connection, for courage, for the willingness to break the silence that had nearly buried them both. She pressed the letter to her heart, a vow blooming inside her. She would carry Lillian's voice forward. She would not let her become just another ghost in a long, unspoken history. As news of the corruption spread, Fort Collins struggled to process what had happened. Some people were angry, at the mayor, at the council, at themselves for looking away. Others wept openly at public meetings, ashamed of how long they'd allowed rumors and secrets to fester. It became clear that the crime wasn't just the actions of a few powerful men, but the silence of an entire community. The roots of complicity ran deep, not out of malice, but out of fear, comfort, habit. The sheriff, shaken by the revelations, called a town meeting in the square. For the first time, people didn't just talk about the scandal, they talked about what had allowed it to happen. Old rivalries faded as neighbors admitted to their own regrets. The times they hadn't asked questions, hadn't listened, hadn't reached out to someone in need. It was painful, but also healing. The town began to change, not all at once, but in small, important ways. New faces appeared at the local shelter. Families who hadn't spoken in years found the courage to sit together on their porches and talk things out. Emily was asked to speak at the meeting. She stood in front of her neighbors, voice shaking at first, hands knotted in Lillian's scarf. She spoke of what it felt like to lose someone, to carry a wound that never really healed. She spoke of the power of truth, even when it hurt, even when it left scars. She told Lillian's story, and her own, letting her vulnerability show. She saw tears in the eyes of people she'd thought were strangers, and in that moment, she felt less alone than she had in years. Rusty stood beside her in the square, quiet and dignified, a living symbol of the story that had brought them together. Children petted his nose. Old-timers pressed hands to their hearts as they watched him, understanding at last the bond between a frightened horse and the woman who'd followed him into the storm. Over the next weeks, as the town moved forward, Emily saw changes everywhere. Some people left, unable to bear the weight of what had been uncovered. Others stayed, determined to make things right. A small memorial was erected in the square, not just for Lillian, but for all the people who'd suffered in silence. Their names now spoken aloud, their stories finally honored. Late one night, sitting with Rusty in the barn, Emily reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the cost of silence, how wounds festered in darkness, how only honesty could begin the process of healing. She realized that courage was not always about grand gestures. Sometimes, it was just about telling the truth, reaching out for help, forgiving yourself for the past. As she brushed Rusty's mane, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath her hand, Emily understood that healing would take time. But for the first time, she believed it was possible. Not just for herself, but for the whole town. In the weeks that followed, Fort Collins was changed in ways that rippled far beyond the headlines. The media vans eventually packed up and moved on. The courthouse crowds shrank. But something quieter and deeper had shifted. An honesty, raw and vulnerable, taking root where silence had once ruled. Emily Carter found herself at the center of that change, not as a hero or a martyr, but as someone simply trying to move forward, scarred yet stronger. Emily's own world transformed in small but meaningful ways. She didn't pretend her pain was cured. There were still nights when nightmares woke her, sweat chilling her skin, or moments when the memory of her sister's absence struck without warning. But she no longer hid from those feelings. Instead, she learned to let herself grieve, to share her story with others, to allow the ache to remind her she was alive. There was comfort in the steady routines she built with Rusty, feeding him at sunrise, brushing his coat under a wide Colorado sky, taking long, quiet rides along the river as the seasons shifted. Each day brought a new sliver of hope, a new reason to trust herself and the world again. Rusty became more than a companion. He became a symbol for the town. At the local elementary school, children learned about courage and kindness from Emily's story. They visited the little memorial in the square, touching the name Lillian Harper etched into the stone, asking questions their parents sometimes struggled to answer. Rusty stood quietly at those gatherings, letting shy hands stroke his muzzle, a living reminder that loyalty and love could change the course of history, even if only for a few hearts at a time. Emily poured her newfound energy into the community. She volunteered at a local shelter, helping people struggling with their own losses. She joined a small support group for survivors of trauma, finding in those meetings both comfort and purpose. For the first time since her sister vanished, she felt herself opening to others, offering what help she could, but also letting herself be helped. She found herself laughing again, sometimes suddenly and without warning, the sound bubbling up from a place inside her that she'd thought was lost forever. On a crisp Saturday morning, Emily saddled Rusty and set out along the river trail. The leaves blazed gold and red. Sunlight danced on the water, and a breeze sent flocks of starlings swirling overhead. Emily breathed in the clean, cold air and felt something like gratitude for the journey she'd survived. She remembered Lillian, not with regret, but with a quiet vow to honor her, not only with words, but by living fully. Every ride, every conversation, every act of courage was a tribute to a woman whose story had nearly been erased. That afternoon, a letter arrived from one of the town elders, a woman Emily barely knew. The handwriting was elegant, precise, shaky with age. "Thank you for your bravery," it read. "Your willingness to speak out has inspired others. Because of you, I found the strength to share my own story after years of silence. You have started something that will not end with you. Never doubt the power of one voice joined by many." Emily sat on her porch with the letter in her lap, sunlight warming her shoulders. She realized she was not alone, had never been alone, not really. The ripples of her actions, of Lillian's courage and Rusty's loyalty, were spreading outward, reaching people she'd never met, changing lives in ways she might never fully understand. As autumn deepened, the town held a ceremony to dedicate the memorial. People gathered beneath strings of lanterns in the square. Families, neighbors, city officials, children with curious eyes and elders with heavy hearts. Emily stood before them, Lillian's scarf draped around her shoulders, Rusty at her side, his coat gleaming in the gentle light. She spoke from her heart, her voice carrying over the crowd. "We are here today not just to remember those we lost, but to honor the truth that set them free," she began, her voice steady. "We learned that silence can be deadly, that injustice survives when good people look away. But we also learned that courage is contagious. When one person dares to speak, others find the strength to join them. That's how change begins, not with anger, but with honesty and compassion. We can't undo the past, but we can build a better future, together." The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then applause broke out, soft at first, then swelling. Emily felt tears prick her eyes, but she smiled through them. Rusty nudged her gently, almost as if reminding her that none of this would have happened without their bond. In that moment, Emily felt connected to everyone in the square, to Lillian, to her own lost sister, to all the silent voices that had finally been heard. As the crowd dispersed, people lingered to share their own stories, some of pain, some of hope, all woven into the new fabric of the community. Children played at Rusty's feet, their laughter ringing out, and Emily knelt to join them, feeling lighter than she had in years. Later, as dusk fell and lanterns glowed in the trees, Emily stood at the memorial, fingertips tracing Lillian's name. She reflected on everything she'd learned, that justice isn't just about exposing wrongs, but about choosing to love and forgive, to open one's heart to connection instead of isolation. Healing, she realized, was an ongoing act, a choice made each day for oneself and for others. In the quiet that followed, Emily found peace. Not perfect, not unbroken, but real. She looked at Rusty, his eyes wise and gentle, and knew their story would echo long after the last headline faded. She whispered, "Thank you," and felt the words settle into the air like a promise. As she walked home beneath the stars, Emily carried with her a simple message, a call to anyone who listened. If you found meaning in this journey, remember that courage and compassion can change lives, maybe even yours. Like, share, and follow for more stories that bring light into the dark. And never be afraid to break the silence.